stop using Radix components and move on. What to? Well, Base UI. In fact, if you're a Shadcn fan, there's already the choice to switch over. Now, if you haven't heard of Base UI before, it's actually from the original creators of Radix, Floating UI, and Material UI, and it's a headless UI library. So it brings the functionality and accessibility of components, but you still bring the design, which is particularly important these days as LLMs still aren't great at considering all of those edge cases and accessibility needs. But what I've described there is also exactly what Radix is. So why do you need a new one? Well, let's just jump right in and let me show you the key differences. I'll start really quickly by showing you the base UI documentation. So you can see all of the components that we have on the left here. You can see they have pretty much all of the ones that you would need in your component library, and even some advanced ones like the combo box that we have here, which you can't get in Radix. And you'll see for all of these, they'll have a nice example on how you can do this and style it with something like CSS modules. And you can even change this to a Tailwind example if you want as well. And the documentation is really good. But we're not here to compare the documentation. So let's just jump right into the first key difference and the one that you'll probably hear the most. And that is just that base UI is actively maintained and Radix is kind of in a zombie state. I mean, if we take a look at that GitHub contribution charts, you'll see that base UI is growing, and Radix seems to apply an occasional commit here and there, but it's even more clear when we take a look at the PRs and issues that have been closed in the last month. You can see base UI has closed 58 issues and merged 154 pull requests, and Radix has closed none and merged no PRs. The TLDR of what happened to Radix was that WorkOS actually bought the company behind Radix and just didn't really invest in Radix, so the Radix team largely left, and we're in the state that we're in now. Radix's co-creator even said that he'd only use Radix if it was his last option, and yes, he is now working on base UI. So it's really just about making sure your apps and dependencies are actively maintained and won't cause you a headache in the future if you hit a bug that isn't going to be fixed. And even better, base UI is actually made to be quite similar to Radix, so migration shouldn't be too bad. But that also doesn't mean they can't sneak in a few improvements. And one of my favorite improvements is how they've handled the as child prop that you get in Radix. Now, if you haven't seen this before, what I've got here is actually a Radix select. And if I wanted to render a custom component here as my select trigger, if I simply wrapped it with the select trigger component, you can see that I get a wrapper component and then also the button that says subscribe, something you should click, by the way. But if I actually wanted to make it so the subscribe button was serving as the select trigger, all I need to do in Radix is simply add on the as child prop to the trigger, and that is telling Radix to merge all of the props and functionality of this select trigger with the component that we have set as its child. And you can see that's happening based on the fact this class name here is being merged with the button, and it's actually overwriting it in this case. So if I simply delete that prop and save, you can see we now have a button, but this is serving functionally as my select trigger. Now that's a pretty handy functionality to have, but a common complaint with it was that it wasn't very explicit, and I'll admit that sometimes when I was quickly looking over code, I would sometimes miss this prop, and therefore I'd miss the cause of the issue. So if we switch over to seeing how this is done in base UI, you can still get the exact same functionality. So I have a button over here that's serving as my select trigger, but if we take a look at the code, instead of using as child, base UI uses the render prop. Now on the render prop, you then specify the component that you want to, well, render in as your select trigger. So this is a very minor change, but I just think it makes it way more explicit exactly what this is doing. It's literally rendering in this component. So you don't have to look whether it's using the child component and look for that as child prop. It's just, as I said, a small change, but a very good one in my opinion. And that's not even the full power of the render prop. We can see here when I'm building out a switch, we can actually pass through a function to the render prop, so we're able to access the props and the state of the component that we're actually building out. So in this case, the switch thumb one. What this allows us to do is A, choose what component we actually want to apply the pass-through props onto, and then we can also do some custom rendering logic or some custom styling logic based on the state of the component. So in this case, with the switch thumb, we can choose whether it's checked, dirty, disabled, filled, and loads more. So in this case, we're simply doing a check for whether it is actually checked or not, and in that case, we're rendering in a different icon. There's even a hook that actually allows you to build in that render prop into your own custom components, but we're getting a little bit advanced here. But hopefully you can see anything custom that you want to do, you should be able to handle it with base UI. Now, if we jump back to my select component, the next difference is that base UI allows some of your components to be data-driven, and we can see that in the case of the select here. What I have currently is the Radix select code. So we have an array here where we have our label and value, and to actually get the values into the select down here, the only thing we need to do is map over the apples array and then simply render in a select item in Radix, and that will add in these values like so. If we then jump over to how this is done in base UI, you can see it's incredibly similar. we still have my array up here of the actual label and values, and down here we're still mapping over it and rendering in a select item, but we're also including it in another place, which is on this select root here, where we're including that array. And this actually has a very subtle impact that means the component is now aware of the data that it's going to render before rendering, and that means that there's slightly better performance, especially when it comes to server-side rendering. One thing I do think could actually be improved about this though is at the moment I'm passing through apples as my items prop, but then down here I'm also mapping over the apples array as well, so we're using it in two places. What I think they should do instead is what React Aria does, which is another headless library. Here you can see we have our animals array, and we're actually passing this through as the items here, and then for the children of that, all we're doing is using a function, and this is going to know all of the items that have been passed through on the parent element. So we're not using that array in two places, and the parent element is serving as the data provider. So it's definitely something I still think could be improved a little bit. But if we head back to my select component, I want to show you another difference, but this one is actually specific to the select component, as the render prop and also the data-driven approach you'll see across pretty much all of the components, but this one is specific to select, and that is that you can have a multi-select. This is something that was painfully missing in Radix. You can see here in base UI, all you need to do is add on the prop to the select root saying multiple, it can be true or false, and then your select simply becomes a multi-select, and it is that easy. And to take it a step further, base UI even has some other components that were missing in Radix, like a combo box and autocomplete, as it really is the benefit of being actively maintained so they can respond to user requests. Now there's two more differences that I want to show you from Radix and base UI, and we'll switch over to using the checkbox component, as I'm a little bit bored of that select component. And the first difference that I want to show you is around styling. Base UI actually gives you another styling choice that I think is really cool. We can see here at the moment I'm currently using Tailwind, and you can use all of the traditional approaches like normal CSS, CSS modules, and loads more. But if you are using something like Tailwind, one of the ways that you typically style a component like this is by using data attributes for the state. So we have data checked here, and if it is checked, we're going to use background primary. You can see we just have a very long string for styling this in Tailwind, which can sometimes become a little bit of a problem. So one of the options that base UI gives you that can help with this is you can actually use a function as your class name, and this gives you access to the state of the component. So in the case of the checkbox here, I'm applying styles based on whether the state is checked or disabled. You can see I'm doing that with a simple conditional here, and I sometimes think this is just a nicer way for a quick glance when you're looking over your code to see where exactly those checked and disabled styles are coming from, instead of having to scan that single line and look for those data attributes. I think it's especially even more helpful if you're using something like vanilla CSS. It also works really well with another library that I really like called Tailwind Variants. You can see here I'm simply passing through the state to my checkbox function, and up in my Tailwind Variant checkbox, we have our base styles, but then we also have our variants, and you can see here I'm simply saying if checked is true, apply these styles, if disabled is true, apply these ones, and I just think sometimes this is way clearer than using those data attributes, but it's definitely up to your opinion and what you're comfortable with using. It's just super nice that base UI gives us all of these choices. I'll also add that using a function as a class name was something I first fell in love with from React Aria, so it really seems to me like we have React Aria over here, which does have a steeper learning curve, and Radix, which is quite simple, and base UI has sort of met in the middle and taken the features that I like about both of them and created me the ultimate headless library. Now that's all of the key differences that I wanted to go over in this video, but there is still loads more. Like base UI has great support for React Hook Form and Tan Stack Form. It has animation support to make it a nice and easy process to actually animate your components, and it even has features like input scrubbing, nested dialogues, and triggering menus on hover. And I'm sure if you have a reasonable request, they'd actually respond to it over on the GitHub, as it is actively maintained. It is also worth saying though that I probably wouldn't jump to migrating my Radix app over to base UI straight away, as I don't think Radix is completely broken. If I'm starting a new project, I'd definitely use base UI now, and if I wanted a feature like a combo box or an autocomplete, I'd also consider migrating my application. Let me know what you think of base UI in the comments though. While you're down there, subscribe, and as always, see you in the next one.